Once a year, the day arises where the evil held away for the rest of the year is unleashed. Spirits roam the streets, ghouls hunt the unfortunate and torment the sleeping.
And I make a bad Halloween video. Well, at least the other two are something to look forward to, right? Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of What Makes This Game Awesome, Spooptober. It's that time of year again. I'm in a new place, and I don't really have anything to spoop the place up, but because it's tradition now, we're going to be talking about a spoopy game. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about a spoopy game that I've already spoken about before, and I'm going to be finishing my Little Nightmares series. I promised that I would finish the DLC. It's time to get around to that. I'm sorry if any of you are waiting the year-long gap since I spoke about the last one, but anyways, today I'm going to be talking about Little Nightmares DLC Part 2 and 3, and what makes these games spoopy. So for those of you who don't know what Little Nightmares is, make sure to check out my review of the actual base game. It's worth a watch. I had even worse hair then than I do now. Also, I'm going to continue this review from where I left off when I finished reviewing the first DLC, so if you haven't seen that, I'd also recommend watching that. Of course, there's going to be spoilers for both DLCs through this video, so don't watch it if you're planning on playing them for yourself. Little Nightmares DLC 2, also known as The Hideaway, was released on the 10th of February 2018. Follows directly on from where the first DLC left off, with the runaway kid, who I'm just going to call Kid, in some restraints after he got captured by the librarian in DLC 1. He manages to break free before these weird meat sacks go to whatever gross place they're headed. He has a long fall and slams down on a pile of coal. And this is where the main focus of all these DLCs, the gnomes, properly get introduced into the story. A big group of gnomes go to check that Kid's okay, and when he wakes up, they all run away from you. Now if you chase after them, you'll pretty quickly find one cowering away, and if you go up and grab it, Kid gives it a hug. Now this makes this gnome friendly, which is the most important part of this second DLC. The gnomes can help you during puzzles, letting you throw them at door handles, pushing things too heavy for you to do by yourself, and generally adding a cool twist to the puzzles we've seen so far from all of Little Nightmares. Now this is a cool mechanic. I like the fact that different puzzles let you manipulate different amounts of gnomes, and how Kid is basically doing the complete opposite of what 6 did to the gnomes. However, the AI of the gnomes can be a bit buggy. They can't always find their way around things, and more than once in my playthrough I had to restart from the last save as the gnomes had actually completely gotten stuck and softlocked the game. I'll be honest, this was really frustrating, especially when I thought it was supposed to happen, and this is my biggest problem with The Hideaway. I love the concept of almost all of these puzzles, but in some rooms the actual solution of the puzzle is pretty unclear, because it gets the gnomes to do stuff you didn't even realize they could do. For example, with this minecart, I had no idea I could get the other gnomes to push it with me, and I didn't know the actual amount of gnomes I needed to help me push it. So when one got stuck and wouldn't push, it took me a long time to realize the game was glitched. Anyway, this aside, the actual puzzles provide a good amount of challenge. Most of them are quite logical and provide a good direction to go in without making it too obvious. After solving some of the harder ones, I'd often go, oh, that's what it meant. And in general, the puzzles are a good follow-on from the rest of the game, with an increased difficulty curve, but not too much for most people to be able to finish. In this chapter, the aim is to rescue as many gnomes as possible and bring them back to the boiler room. The gnomes can carry coal into the boiler to power this lift. The lift will only move if you have enough gnomes powering it. To get all of these gnomes, you have to complete a lot of puzzles, like a lot of them. My favourite of which is another run-in with the librarian, where you have to avoid piles of coal that crunch under your feet while trying to carry this battery all the way back to the initial room. As with most of the librarian sections, it's super tense, scary as hell, and those clicks he does. Ugh, they never get less creepy. You actually run into him twice in this chapter, and the second run is even more scary. If you play with a controller, you can feel Kid's heartbeat, and when you open a really loud, creaky metal door, and Kid's heartbeat picks up, and the librarian starts doing that weird clicky noise, it's very hard not to get stressed and panic. As always, the atmosphere of Little Nightmares is almost unmatched, and still my favourite thing about the game. After escaping the librarian, gathering up all of the gnomes and taking them back to the boiler room, you can ride up the lift to the top of the boiler and then head over to this lift. This leads on to the third and final DLC, with a final shot of the underside of the lift where the main antagonist of the base game, the lady, is first shown in the DLC. So to sum up the second DLC, it's really not the direction I'd expected them to take, but I actually quite like the emphasis that they put on teamwork. Considering you get picked up by the librarian at the end of the first chapter, I expected most of this chapter to be based around escaping him, but you pretty much only see him twice, which isn't very often in this one. I also expected it to tie in with 6's storyline more, but you really don't see 6 at all in this chapter. As I said, the glitches in this chapter get really annoying. This is actually my least favourite chapter out of all 3 of the DLC, but the puzzles are really good and they do bring it back, so this definitely isn't a bad chapter, it's just the worst out of the 3. That said, I do really like this chapter. I like all of the DLC, but this one stands out as being quite different to the other 2. That said, I would still rate it quite high, and I'll be giving the whole DLC pack a review at the end of this video, so stay for that. Anyway, for now, it's time to get on to the third and final and spoopiest part of fuck's sake, I'm an idiot. To the third, final, and spoopiest of all of the DLC. So, starting the third DLC, you're instantly thrown into the lair of the lady. At this point in the story, you've already been here as 6 and killed the lady, so it seems fairly obvious that for her to be alive, you must be getting here before 6 does. The puzzles in this section focus heavily on light and dark, the solutions to most of them being dependent on your torch or some other source of light. Now, as I said when I was talking about the first part of the DLC, I feel like 6's lighter was a much better light source than Kid's torch, and I'm sure this was done to add another source of difficulty, as some of these puzzles would be extremely easy with 6's lighter. Annoyingly though, the torch doesn't always control in the most intuitive of ways, getting stuck sometimes or not working when you're too close to the thing you're trying to shine the light on. Normally in the game, if you aim the camera stick around, the torch will follow it, but sometimes, in a way that's pretty hard to explain, the controls of the torch switch from being in a 3D mode to kind of around your character, which is very confusing. Anyway, putting that to the side for now, the lair of the lady is pretty similar to how it was when we were here as 6 before. The whole place is very dark, and with shadowy figures running around in the background and laughing at you, it creates a very genuine fear of the darkness. These eyeballs have been in all 3 of the chapters of this DLC, and it's hinted at in the other chapters that whenever you see one of these, light will trigger something important. One of the puzzles I like the most in this chapter is another one of these eyeball lights, where if you stand in front of the light, you turn to stone. Helps to reinforce that stark contrast between the light and the dark, and I honestly think this is the theme that this chapter is going for. Now, I know that it's trying to create some contrast, but this chapter is really fucking dark. In one instance, you have to be able to see some symbols to place some books, and the game is so dark when you turn off your torch to carry something. In my room's lighting, I couldn't actually see the symbol. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, it does help to make the atmosphere a lot stronger, but it's totally worth keeping in mind, especially if your monitor doesn't go too bright. As you solve more and more of the puzzles standing between you and the lady, you begin to run into specters, these weird shadow kids wearing masks that disintegrate when you shine your torch on them. They're very irritating to kill when they come at you from multiple directions, but solving puzzles while having to loop around them and keep them in your constant line of sight is actually pretty fun when you get it down. As I said before, the torch controls change, and this happens whenever a spectre is in the room or going to be in the room, which can get a bit irritating. The spectres are the only enemy you have to fight in this chapter, and their weakness to light makes it such a huge sigh of relief when you walk into a lit room, and quite a spine-chilling moment when the lights in a room flicker or turn off. You're constantly checking the surroundings for spectres and moving shadows, so they don't cheap out on the atmosphere here. After you get through this door, you see the lady looking at her face in the mirror, and ooh, that's a spoopy face. She sees you and proceeds to stalk you from the shadows in a room of mannequins, making you start and jump at every little movement. This goes on for quite a while, walking through a lot of these creepy mannequin rooms, and this part really did freak me out. And after a lot of doors opening behind your back, you walk into a room and get grabbed by the lady, where she turns you, wait for it, into a gnome. Has anyone figured out the plot twist yet? After this, you clumsily stumble over to the kitchen, your little bab jumps not letting you escape or go any other route apart from this one. You walk in and see the sausage on the floor, and then the game slowly fades out to the credits. If anyone hasn't made the connection yet, this is only a few seconds before the scene where 6 eats this gnome, as in eats the main character of this DLC which you've been playing as the whole time, which is an absolutely massive plot twist and an amazing way for this DLC to end, in my opinion. So overall, these DLC chapters make for quite an interesting and unusual and quite unexpected addition to the game. I really was expecting them to take a completely different path with the DLC than they did, but I really like what they've done with it. I think that some things about the DLC, like how dark it can get at times, and maybe how prone the second chapter is to glitching, do sometimes let it down a little bit, but as a whole pack, this is really good. Much better value for money than I said it would be after finishing my first video on the DLC. You can probably come to expect between like 3 and 5 hours for a total playthrough of all 3 of these DLCs. 3 would be a bare minimum, but I would really hope that they go the extra mile and make it, you know, definitely more than that. In my opinion, this is worth the money, because you get a massive expansion to the game with plenty of extra playtime, a lot more puzzles, a lot more of what you like about the game, but kind of presented in a different way, and I think that's great. If you liked the base game, these are definitely worth checking out. I really can't do the chapters enough justice in these reviews, so if you want to check them out for yourself, I'd wholeheartedly recommend that you go and do that, because they're much cooler and, dare I say, spoopier. To play than they are to watch. The vibration through the controller and just the tense atmosphere of having to avoid all these enemies. It's really cool, and you should experience it for yourself. So anyways, as always, with everything taken into consideration, I would rate the total DLC pack of all 3 DLC an 8 out of 10. They're definitely above average, all of them. They are amazing, they're all pretty good follow-ons to the game, and while I still think that the second DLC is the worst, it's still good. Like, all 3 of them are very good parts of the game by themselves, and they continue on with this unique story that no one was expecting. Some of the chapters are amazing little chapters with really hard puzzles, and I wasn't expecting them to get this challenging, but some of the later ones took me a really long time to complete. While the second chapter does bring the score down just a tiny bit, the other 2 keep that score really high, and I genuinely cannot give this game enough credit for how well they have handled the DLC, the base game, and just everything to do with it. Also, on the subject of the DLC, there are also 2 optional items that you get if you buy the DLC as a pack, which just let you equip a hat on 6, but I'm not playing through the whole game again just to get those 2 hats, so it's there if you guys want to do it. But for sure, if you enjoyed the base game of Little Nightmares, this is a must for you. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a very spoopy Halloween, and of course, if you have anything you want me to talk about, let me know about it in the comments. Sorry that this year's Spooktober video was a little short, but I'm a bit busy at the moment. I definitely have a few more reviews on the way, so make sure to stay tuned for those. As always, check out my social stuffs, links on screen now and in the description, and subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed it and want to see more of this kind of thing. Anyway, with all that said, I'll see you in the next review, so see you there.